All right, on with the program this evening. It's a great program, and a lot of people have done a lot of hard work. It's going to be narrated by Sue Ellen Holland. Some of you may remember that Sue Ellen has done a number of our programs, including last June's program on old houses and mansions of Woburn. She does a fabulous job. She's a charter member of the Historical Society. She's been with us from the beginning 3 years ago. She's also a part-time archivist, part-time assistant in the archives of the Woburn Public Library. And for the last 28 years or so, her primary occupation has been as the founder and owner of Little Folks Day School for a daycare center over in Cummings Park. So she really likes to do these programs so she can talk to some adults for a change. Let's give a nice welcome to Sue Ellen Holland. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to the Woburn Historical Society's presentation of Back to School, Schoolhouses from Woburn's Past. I would like to thank a couple of people. First of all, Joseph McElhenney, who's going to handle all of the switching of slides, etc. tonight. Thank you, Joseph. Also, Kathy O'Doherty of the Woburn Public Library for the use of a number of the library's photographs that you'll see tonight. And I would especially like to thank Kathy Lucero, Ellen Hamilton, and John McElhenney for all of their help in putting this program together. This was a team effort. Let me just say that tonight's program is a condensed history of Woburn schools. It will show that history through photographs of the school buildings and of the people in the buildings. If there is one thing that I learned from conducting the research from this program, it's that there is enough information available to do at least another 20 programs about schools, teachers, principals, and students. So we'll start first of all with colonial days and early education. This is an early Woburn home. Woburn was like many early New England towns. The schoolhouse quickly followed the founding of a settlement and the establishment of a church. Charlestown Village was founded in 1640. Its church was established in 1642, and it was incorporated as the town of Woburn in October of 1642. The first schools were known as dame schools. They were an early form of a private elementary school and were located in a teacher's home. The children were usually taught how to write the alphabet and how to read the New Testament. The law of Massachusetts Colony at the time permitted teachers to be paid directly by the heads of families. As such, there are no municipal records of funds being used to pay teachers in the early years. The first record of town support for schools appears in 1673, when 2 teachers received the sum of 5 shillings each. One of the teachers was Goodwife Converse, who lived in the area of Richardson's Row, which today is known as Washington Street. The Benjamin Wyman House on Wyman Street. From this humble beginning, Woburn's school system grows. There were not a lot of students in the early years, as children were needed to work on the farms and in the homes. For many years, the schools would have a larger population during the winter months and a lesser number in the spring and the fall, when the students were needed to plant and harvest crops. As the town grew, so did the student population. In 1685, conditions were such that under the law, a grammar school had to be established. Mr. Samuel Carter was hired as a teacher at the annual salary of $25. However, he had no students. Evidently, the town believed that it was better to pay a teacher a salary, even if he had no students, than to pay a fine to the county for a non-compliance with the law. It should be indicated, however, that Woburn did support education and contributed generously to Harvard College. In 1713, the first schoolhouse in Woburn was built in the center of town, on the site of the present-day Satsang Center of the former Unitarian Church. In this photo, the church still has its steeple, which was later lost in the hurricane of 1925. The Center Grammar School remained here until 1808, when it was moved to Montvale Avenue near the Peterson School, the former Woburn Daily Times site. The teachers were usually undergraduates of Harvard College or Woburn men who had graduated from Harvard. Some of the noteworthy teachers in Woburn at the time were the Honorable Nathaniel Saltonstall of Haverhill, the Honorable Jonathan Sewell, the Attorney General at the start of the American Revolution, Reverend John Hancock, the father of Governor John Hancock, and the Reverend John Fox and his son, Colonel Jabez Fox. The work of these educational pioneers allowed Woburn's educational system to succeed. In 1792, the town appointed a committee to examine the school system, report on its condition, and suggest improvements. The report of this committee is in the town records. Some of the highlights of it are as follows. Only teachers of the highest morality are qualified to teach. Great care should be taken in the selection of a school committee who will be responsible for hiring teachers. A fixed course of study should be determined, including the study of catechism, and also that the town should provide paper, pen, inks, and books to those children whose families cannot afford them. Quote, so that each child may have the advantage of a free school and be made useful to himself and to others. At this time, the town was divided into school districts. Each district was responsible for its own schools, including the funding of the school. The purchasing of the selection of books, the hiring of the teachers, etc., were all done just at the district level. In 1794, 9 new schoolhouses were built at a total cost of $2,000. Small as that might seem today, this was actually about double the original estimated cost of the buildings, showing that municipal construction costs have overruns and they're nothing new. Of these district schools, 4 of them are in what is today the town of Burlington, which was established as a separate town in 1799. And 1 of them was in Winchester, which was also part of Woburn until 1850. The oldest district school, of which we have a photo, is the West Side School, located in the area of Four Corners. This building was later moved to Cambridge Road near Pond Street and converted into a private dwelling. It was replaced by another school in the Four Corners area and referred to as the Cambridge Street School, which apparently burned down in 1871. That building was replaced by this building on the same site at the triangular corner of Cambridge Road and Lexington Street. The cost of the new school was $1,600 and consisted of 1 room plus an anteroom. This school had the smallest population of any of the town schools at the time. This school building was later moved across Cambridge Road, and it is still standing today and houses the Adams Animal Clinic. Another of the district schoolhouses was the Cedar Street School located on Cedar Street in the Button End section of East Woburn. An early building was sold in the 1870s, but replaced by a new school building in 1874. It was a 2-room schoolhouse with a wooden frame. It suffered 2 fires in 1902-03 school year. On December 8, 1902, the northern end burned extensively. On July 6, 1903, a fire caused mostly basement damage. Insurance money was used to repair the school in both instances. An attempt was made to close the school in 1940, but 70 East Woburn residents protested the closing at a public hearing before the school committee. Is any of this sounding familiar? Alderman Golden led the opposition. Mayor Kane wanted the school closed, indicating that transportation would be provided to the Goodyear School with a hot lunch program there. Parents protested that they wanted their children home for lunch. At the time, the school housed 42 students and 2 teachers, and the plumbing had been condemned. The school committee finally voted to close the Cedar Street School, with students being transferred to the Goodyear School in September 1948. Let's hope the plumbing was repaired for those 8 years. This is a photo of children at the Cedar Street School taken in 1927. In 1949, the land and building were sold to a private developer, and today it is the site of the Chestnut Green office condominiums. This is another of the old district schools, the Moore Street School. Research indicates that the school was originally on Pleasant Street in 1851 and moved to Moore Street in 1865. It was a 2-room schoolhouse of wood frame construction, and the tornado of 1925 took the roof off of the building. Here's a group of school children at the Moore Street School in 1903. An attempt was made by the school committee to close the school in 1940. But again, about 60 parents protested the closing at a public hearing. Most of the students would have gone to the Plimpton School under the plan. The school remained open until 1956, when the Malcolm White School opened. Students from the Moore Street School were transferred to the Lawrence, Hanson, and White schools initially. Then in January 1957, they moved to the new Hurld School. And this is the site of the Moore Street School as it appears today. This is a modern-day photo of what was once the Main Street School, located on Main Street at the corner of Charles Street. It was one of the old district schoolhouses also. Another of the district schools was the North Woburn School. It was located at the corner of Main Street and School Street, and it is the reason that School Street has its name. It was later renamed the Rumford School in honor of Benjamin Thompson, known as Count Rumford, who was born in a house across the street from the school. Here is the site of the North Woburn School as it appears today. Notice the house to the right, which was also visible in the earlier photograph. The Central Grammar School is pictured here on the left. The building on the right is the town hall. The center, or central school, was moved from the Unitarian Church lot and built on this Common Street location in 1843. It was used as a school until 1885. It was transferred to the town in 1886 and converted to a municipal building. A courtroom and a police office were located in it from 1886 to 1892, when the old town hall to the right in this photo was converted to a combination police station and courthouse. The former center school building was used as the town hall until 1931. Here is a Central Grammar School class from 1878. Note the students are in between two buildings. The school over here on the left, and the old town hall is over here on the right. This is another group from the year 1881. And today, Woburn City Hall occupies the schoolhouse site. Warren Academy on Warren Avenue was established in 1828. Basically, it was a private high school and was tuition-based. It was designed to educate the very bright students who desired to continue their education and who could afford to do so. At the time, formal education for most students ended at the age of 12 or 13. Many people felt that the students, particularly girls, had learned all that they needed to know by that age. Warren Academy was for the small number of students who wanted to continue their education, and most importantly, had the means to pay for that higher education. It was not designed as a public high school to provide a free education for all. In later years, the town would lease space from Warren Academy for public high school classes. After the establishment of a public high school, the trustees of Warren Academy sustained a free industrial school in the Academy building for many years, offering classes in subjects such as art, music, sewing, and industrial arts. Warren Academy was later destroyed by a fire. And this is the Warren Academy site as it appears today, directly across the street from New Horizons at Choate. The mid-1800s was a period of tremendous growth for the town of Woburn. The economy was healthy, the leather businesses were thriving, and banks were fueling the expansion of businesses. At the same time, the potato famines in Ireland were causing many to seek their fortunes in America. Many of the Irish immigrants came to Woburn to find work in the tanneries and the factories, as did immigrants from Nova Scotia and as would Italian immigrants in the later 1800s. The huge influx of predominantly Irish immigrants predominantly Irish immigrants caused Woburn's population to expand from about 3,800 in 1850 to almost 6,300 in 1860. It was an almost 60% increase in just 10 years. Woburn would not see this significant of a population increase again. Only the baby boomers of the 1950s would come close. With the increase in population came overcrowded schools and the need for change. The concept of small 1- and 2-room district schoolhouses would be eliminated. The new concept of the town being responsible for all of the schools was put into practice. Now the town was responsible for funding the schools, hiring the teachers, developing the curriculum, purchasing school supplies and books, etc. At this time, Woburn would also see the establishment of its first public high school. One of the first of the new schools to be built was the Plimpton School. The lot was selected in 1859 and the schoolhouse was built and dedicated in 1860. It was named after Dr. Augustus Plimpton and built as a 4-room schoolhouse of wood frame construction. The 1866 annual report states that it was overcrowded. This group of Plimpton students is from 1888 and the teacher is Catherine McElhenney. 2 rooms were added in 1890, and it was later remodeled in 1923. This photo is from the Farino collection of the library and was probably taken in the 1950s. The Plimpton School was destroyed by fire in 1964. The fire was first noticed by a neighbor, Miss Elizabeth Folan, who was a school nurse. The huge fire in the wooden building was a hopeless cause for the firefighters, whose efforts were concentrated on protecting the surrounding homes in the neighborhood. The fire claimed the life of the longtime janitor, Mr. Joseph Flaherty, who was checking the building at night and trapped inside. After the fire, students were redistricted to other schools, including the McGaw and the Wyman schools, until the building was rebuilt. The state had approved the plans for state funding purposes, and the insurance settlement covered most of the cost of the building. And here's the new Plimpton School as it appears today. While it is still owned by the city of Woburn, it was closed as an elementary school in the 1970s. The Johnson School is on the left in this photo, with the Lucero Estate on the right. The Johnson School was built in 1860 and located on Willow Street. It was originally named the Cummingsville School due to its location. We are not sure when it was renamed or for which Johnson, but by 1877, it was known as the Johnson School. The Johnson School was originally a 2-room schoolhouse of wood frame construction. 2 additional rooms were added in 1875. And here is a 1930 photo of the first grade class at the Johnson School. It was used until 1958. The opening of the Hurd School in January of 1957 and the Taki School in 1959 allowed the Johnson to close. And today, the Johnson School is the site of a small playground. And here we have the Union Street School, which was built in 1867. It also was of wood frame construction and contained 4 classrooms. It was closed at the end of the school year in June 1956, only to be reopened that September in an effort to end double sessions. The result was a hodgepodge of busing with Parker and Johnson School students going to the Plimpton and the Union Street schools, and it appears that the Union Street School was used until the Hurd School opened in 1957. 90 years later. This is a Union Street class photo from 1906. And we understand that Bud Fowle's father was a member of this class. The Union Street School group here is from 1910. Many of you may remember longtime Woburn librarian Evelyn Fowle, who was a member of this class. And that's her right there. Today, the Union Street School is a parking lot used by the Greek church. The Lawrence School at the corner of Main Street and Hudson Street was built in 1870 to 71, and it was on the site of the Lawrence Estate, which had burned down in 1857. The cost of the new school was $14,484.44. It was a 4-room schoolhouse of wood frame construction and was built to house 200 students. Here it is, all decked out in patriotic bunting. Dr. Thomas Glennon wrote an interesting description of his first days at the Lawrence School in the early 1900s. Quote, "From her well-deserved niche in heaven, the kindly eyes of my first-grade teacher, Miss Allen, must look down on a vast array of men and women who took the first cautious steps into the new world of learning in the small classroom in the northeast corner of the Lawrence School. I can see her, a little lady of gentleness and patience, in shirtwaist and skirt, belt and high collar, standing before the class, a constant smile on her face, as she led me and my classmates through the intricacies of alphabet and numbers. There was no rebellion against the tyranny of school in those days, only an eagerness to be present and to take part." End quote. Though he speaks very highly of many of his teachers, not all of them were as fondly remembered, as you'll hear. A fire in December of 1958 started in the boiler room while classes were in session. Calvin Marion, the janitor, discovered the fire and alerted the teachers and the fire department. 3 teachers led 76 students safely out of the building. The Lawrence School was out of service until 1959. It was used as a school until the opening of the Clapp School in February 1960, when it was converted to the school administration building and served as such until the late 1970s. Today, it is the location of the South End Fire Station. The Cummings School on Main Street was built in 1874 to relieve overcrowding and to replace a school on Warren Avenue, which had burned. It was an 8-room brick building built on the site of the former DeBlois estate. It had a modern ventilation system for its day and a central stove. It was the largest school in town to this date. It was 3 stories in height and had a hall that could seat 1,000 people. The Cummings School was dedicated in 1874 and named in honor of John Cummings, a wealthy and well-respected leather manufacturer and town official. He was the president of MIT and had long tenures on the Woburn School Committee, the Board of Trustees of the Woburn Public Library, to name just a few. A Cummings School class photo from 1896. The teacher in this photo is Alice Grammer. Dr. Glennon would also attend the Cummings School, and following is his description of some of his later years. Quote, "My promotion from the 4th grade to the 5th was more than a move from one grade to another. It was a transfer to the huge red brick building, the Cummings School, majestic in its 19th century architecture, a school where boys of 8 or 9 were associated with young men of 14 or even 15. I remember the anticipation of the September, which saw my entrance into this school. There was a measure of awe in the feelings which came over me when I passed through the narrow outside door and turned left into the room of Miss So-and-so. This changed to a positive fear when the teacher made her opening remarks to the class. Though I had been forewarned concerning the strict discipline maintained in this grade, I was wholly unprepared for the whiplash behavior and the high-pitched voice. From the moment of admittance, there was no question about the determination of the teacher to rule that group with an iron hand." End quote. Another class photo, and this one's from 1899, and includes the principal. Principal here is Mr. J.B. Hogue. Mr. Hogue is part of an interesting story. Both he and his wife, Elizabeth Leslie Hogue, served as principals of schools in Woburn. Perhaps the rules were different for principals, but this was at a time when most women teachers had to be single. If a woman teacher married, she had to leave her teaching position. This rule stayed in effect until 1964, when Woburn was one of only 2 or 3 communities in Massachusetts that still maintained a restriction on hiring married female teachers. It's another photo of the Cummings School. The Cummings School was a major casualty of Hurricane Carol in 1954. The Woburn Daily Times reported, quote, "The entire front facade, third floor of the building dropped out and resolved itself in a heap of brick on the Main Street side of the building," end quote. The school committee met in an emergency session at the police station as there was no power and no lights at the high school. They voted to transfer the Cummings students to the Hanson School via bus from the Lawrence School. Double sessions were held at the Hanson School with Cummings students attending from 12 to 4 p.m. The Cummings School was closed until further notice. Though the city thought about repairing the building and reopening it, the state building inspector labeled the structure unfit for continued use as a school, and it would never reopen. 3 years later, the school was torn down in 1957 and is the present-day site of a senior citizens housing complex fronting both Warren Avenue and Main Street. Over the years, several schools have been built in East Woburn. The plan of East Woburn in 1841 shows a school at the corner of Washington and A Streets. This is roughly the area where the White Hen Pantry on Montvale Avenue is located today. In 1860, the East Woburn School, a district school, was built at the corner of Central and Utica Streets. That building was condemned and replaced by this building in 1874. It consisted of 4 rooms and was of wood frame construction. By 1887, the name was changed to the Montvale School. 2 additional rooms were added in 1898 at a cost of $4,200. The name was officially changed to the Goodyear School in 1900. It was named after Charles Goodyear, who developed the process of vulcanizing rubber and who had lived around the corner from this school in earlier years. Overcrowding of the school led to a request by the school committee for a 2-room addition. But the city council and the mayor went one step further, and they built a new Goodyear School across the street. That was in 1925. The old Goodyear was razed in 1928 and was to be used as a playground. It later became the site of the East Woburn Fire Station. This is a photograph of the Rumford School, circa 1900. The Count Rumford House is in the foreground, and the school was named in honor of Count Rumford, Benjamin Thompson, in 1874 to 75. In January of 1876, it was almost completely destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt by George Fowle in the same year. It consisted of 4 rooms, with 4 more rooms being added in 1894, 1895, making it a large school for its time. These are individual photos of students that were attending the Rumford School. The Rumford School was originally the North Woburn School and was moved to its current site on Elm Street in 1865. In 1866, 2 more rooms were added to it. This is a photo from the 1920s of students at the Rumford School. And the teacher is Miss May Folan, my great aunt. And this is Miss Folan the day she retired from the Rumford School in 1964. On November 11th, 1970, the Rumford School was destroyed by a firebomb. The Rumford students were sent to the Alta Vista School, but overcrowding was a problem. 12 portable classrooms were being used throughout the city. The Rumford School was rebuilt at a cost of $734,000, and this is as it appears today, the Rumford portion being on the right-hand side. The Highland Street School was originally known as the Green Street School. It was moved to the Highland Street location in 1867. It also was of wood frame construction and consisted of 4 rooms. It was located on the lower end of Highland Street of the parcel at the northerly corner of South Street. In 1891, this new structure was built on the same parcel of land, but in a different location on the lot. The new structure later became known as the McGaw School in 1925. It was named for William McGaw, a serviceman who was killed in action in France during World War I. It was used as a school until April 1964, when the Shamrock School opened. Miss Bertha Bain served for a number of years as the principal of the McGaw School. When she retired as assistant superintendent in charge of elementary education, she had worked as a teacher and administrator in Woburn for 50 years. She had served under 4 superintendents: George Clapp, Daniel Hurld, Dr. Hassett, and Dr. LaMontagne. The Woburn Daily Times stated, quote, "During her career, Miss Bain always placed the interests and welfare of the students as her priority," end quote. The city had a plan to renovate the McGaw School for city offices, but it was too costly to repair and was finally demolished in 1974, 10 years after it closed. Today it is a small park. When the Wyman School in Central Square was first proposed and built, it was known simply as the Central Square School. However, it was quickly renamed the Wyman School. It was probably named to honor the Wyman brothers, who were amongst the first settlers in Woburn in 1640, and who operated one of the first tanneries in this same area. At the beginning of the program, we saw the early home of Benjamin Wyman, and this was probably who the school was named after. Note also at the front of the photograph, the trolley. The Wyman School opened in the fall of 1892 and has been used continuously ever since. It originally was a 5-room schoolhouse. In 1924, a 4-room addition was added to the back of the building. Another addition was added in the early 1960s. In this photograph, what I like is the fountain working on Wyman Green. This is a circa 1890 photo of a class at the Wyman School. It features the other half of the husband-wife principal team. This is Mrs. Elizabeth Leslie Hogue, or Mrs. J.B. Hogue. And here's a photograph of the Wyman School as it appears today. There are no trolleys or any fountains in this photo. The Parker School was located at the junction of Cambridge Road and Lexington Streets. It was built in 1894 on the site of the former Cambridge Street School and in the vicinity of the earlier West Side School. It had 2 rooms, was of wood frames construction. The earlier schools were built on land that the town leased from Henry Parker as early as 1955. This building was called the Parker School as early as 1903. It was used until about 1957, when the opening of the Hurld School on Bedford Road relieved the overcrowding on the west side. In 1958, the Tarkey School opened on Russell Street, and the Parker School was definitely not used as a school after that time. The building housed Mountain TV for many years. And in December of 1996, the Parker School building was demolished after being purchased by Olson Cadillac, which operates on the site today. Before we move on to the next round of school building projects, there are a few topics which can be mentioned here. The first is the opening of the St. Charles School in 1884. The opening of the school drew about 400 students out of the Woburn school system, and it relieved the pressure on the public school system that was caused by the overcrowded conditions. It allowed the Central Grammar School on Common Street to close, and the building was converted to town hall space. Also, for several years in the 1880s, the town had been using the high school building on Main Street, later known as the Hanson School, as a grammar school. It was known for that period of time as the Edward W. Hudson School, named after the longtime proprietor of the Hon Pond House. The high school students had been using the Warren Academy as a high school building. The opening of St. Charles School allowed the high school students to go back to their building on Main Street. In this photo, the first St. Charles School is actually the building way down here on the far left. It was for boys only and was known for a time as St. John's. In 1907, the building on the right was constructed, and it was for use as both a grammar and high school age students. Here is another view of the St. Charles Grammar School, and in the background, in this photograph, you can see Warren Academy. In 1921, land from the estate of Edward A. Dow became the site of the St. Charles High School and the Catholic Center Hall. And here is the 5th grade class of 1927 in front of St. Charles High School. Alice Spinazzola Booza is in this photo. I believe that's her right there. And we thank her for the photo. This photo of St. Charles students was taken in 1952. Included in this photo are Jim Glennon in the front row and Jim Haggerty of the Woburn Daily Times Chronicle. And he's standing right in front of Father James Garrity. This is Thomas Emerson. He was the first superintendent of Woburn Schools and also the high school principal. He served first as the principal of the high school, then he spent half of his time as principal of the high school and half of his time as superintendent. That certainly doesn't happen today. Emerson would later leave Woburn for a few years and then return as a superintendent for another 15 years. During his initial term as superintendent, some of his innovations included the start of a training school for teachers in 1867 and the inauguration of an evening school in 1896. He also put an emphasis on items which seem basic today, but which were not taken for granted back then. Things such as a uniform curriculum from school to school, proper ventilation and heating systems, and more recess and physical activity times. In this photograph taken at the Cummings School, we see Superintendent Thomas Emerson, sitting right here, and Principal J.B. Hogue. And a rather scary-looking teacher. This is Superintendent Thomas Emerson at rest. Let's hope we have not had too many of our school superintendents that were laying down on the job. Another topic we can mention is that of corporal punishment. While not permitted today, it was accepted and expected in earlier years. And perhaps after viewing a photo like this one of some of the Plimpton School students, we can understand why. Take a look at some of the characters in the back row here. They look like they walked out of a movie about the dead-end kids. Then look at the teacher over here. How do you suppose she handled some of those tough kids? Let's hope that this one young man in this photo kept himself out of trouble. He grew up to be Judge Henchy. In the annual reports of the City of Woburn, the number of incidences of corporal punishment were recorded. This is a Cummings School group in 1899. The principal, Mr. J.B. Hogue, is at the center of the photograph. In the 1899 to 1900 year, the Cummings School led all of the schools in the number of instances where corporal punishment was administered throughout the school year, 251 times. Does this look like a tough group? Or were there a large number of disobedient students? Or did the Cummings School keep better records than the other schools? Or were there more teachers that were willing to hand out such a punishment? Teachers perhaps like Dr. Glennon's 5th grade teacher, who was, quote, "Through the long year, she paced up and down the room, slapping a desk here and there with the limber wood of a light rattan to stress a point, and laying on the back and the hand many an unfortunate who failed to obey her staccato demands, or who, through carelessness or inattention, were unable to recite the lessons correctly. I was ever fearful of her wrath. I dared not speak out of turn or neglect a single lesson. But the day did come when I was bawled out before the class and commanded to hold out your hand. 2 cracks on the palm of the hand brought tears to my eyes, I must admit, but the embarrassment hurt more than the beating itself." End quote. Fortunately for Dr. Glennon, by the 8th grade, he was, quote, "was blessed with the last perfect example of a dedicated, driving, determined, and discipline-demanding teacher, Miss Heavey. I firmly believe that the big change in my life can be traced to this white-haired and seemingly harried woman who could teach well every subject in the long list that must be covered in preparation for pupils for promotion to the high school. In this room came to me the first sensation of a desire for superior attainment. The sense of having been plucked from the horrible abyss of the commonplace at that time has never left me." End quote. I'm sure many of us can remember teachers who affected us in a similar fashion. The time period of 1900 to 1950 was relatively quiet for the Woburn schools. The most notable event was the construction and opening of Woburn High School on Montvale Avenue in 1907, which we'll hear a little bit about later. There was some continued growth and some new schools. The Linscott School, pictured here on Elm Street, was built in 1922. And though it was a separate building, it was built right next to the Rumford School. Therefore, when it first opened, and for several years, the brick building was also called the Rumford School. Both buildings were the Rumford School for a few years. The Linscott School was named in honor of Andrew Linscott, who was a veteran of the Civil War. He was also the principal of the Rumford School for 40 years. Here he is, the top center of the photograph. And that was taken at a reunion of Civil War veterans in 1919. This is a group of school children from the brick Linscott School in 1927. The year the name of the building was changed from the Rumford to the Linscott. So though it says Rumford at the bottom, this is the Rumford Linscott School. The 2 buildings became known as the Linscott Rumford School. The Linscott Rumford School children in grades 1 through 5 in the 1930s are in this photo, which was taken in front of the Linscott School section. At the time, the Rumford School section housed grades 1 to 3. The Linscott School section housed grades 4 and 5. In 1986, the Linscott section was destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt, and this is how it appears today. This is the Whittemore Estate that was located on Montvale Avenue at the corner of Central Street in East Woburn. It was owned by Benjamin F. Whittemore, a U.S. congressman from South Carolina, who later relocated to Woburn. He had a daughter, Ashley, who operated the Ashley Hall School on the ground of the estate. The city took the Whittemore Estate by eminent domain and built a new 8-room brick schoolhouse in 1926, and it was known as the new Goodyear School. It suffered fire damage in 1953 and was rebuilt. An addition was built in 1960 to ease crowded conditions. This is the new Goodyear School as it appears today. It is scheduled to be demolished and replaced with another new Goodyear School by September of 2011. This is a group of school children from the Linscott School on a field trip in the 1950s. We put this in basically because we like the photo and it shows the buses of the time. By the 1930s, people recognized that most of the old 19th century schools were tired, outdated, and inefficient for modern school purposes. But we were in the middle of the Great Depression, and there was no money available to build new schools. So Woburn had to do had to do the best that it could with what it had. This was then followed by World War II, when building supplies and labor were in short supply. So the schools continued to age with no new school construction taking place. The baby boomers made their presence felt beginning in the late 1940s and continuing through the 1950s and 1960s. It was a time of tremendous population growth, and it continued unabated. There was an enormous strain put on the school system with increased populations in old, outdated buildings. Busing was taking place all over the city. Schools were forced to hold double sessions. Classes were being held in auditoriums and hallways. On top of all this, the Goodyear School was damaged by a fire in 1953 and put out of commission for half of the year. Then the Cummings School was so badly damaged by a hurricane in 1954 that it would never open again. What followed all of this was one of the largest school building programs that the city has ever seen. With all of the controversy that seems to surround the building of one new school today, it is hard to imagine that between 1956 and 1970, 12 new schools were built in the city of Woburn. Additionally, 5 major additions were built to the Goodyear, the Wyman, the Clapp, Shamrock, and Woburn High School. The first school built, Joe, could you go back on that one? Thank you. The first school built in this period was the Malcolm S. White School on Bow Street. It opened in September of 1956 with Lawrence Byron as the principal. Because of its proximity to Woburn High School in more recent years, Mayor Curran was able to tie this site in with the high school's building site, and a new White School was built along with the new high school. The original building was knocked down in recent years and replaced with this new school building in 2005. The Daniel P. Hurld School on Bedford Road opened in January 1957. Francis X. McCall was the principal. It was built on the land of the Given Farm and the Harold Dobbins Farm. It was named after Superintendent of Schools Daniel P. Hurld. The William J. Tarkey School opened on Russell Street in 1958. P. Joseph Conley was the first principal. The naming of the Tarkey School followed an offer of a $25,000 bequest from the estate of the late William J. Tarkey of 65 Cambridge Road. He was a successful businessman with the Baldo Packing Company. He had been a silent philanthropist throughout his lifetime, doing innumerable things while requesting no publicity. His sister made the offer of $25,000 to the Woburn Scholarship Committee, contingent upon the school being named after her brother. It did not seem to be an unreasonable request, and the school committee accepted the idea. The first installment of the money was made available to the Scholarship Committee for that June's graduation. Overcrowding was so severe in the 1950s that an addition had to be built onto the Tarkey School in 1960. The Tarkey School closed at the end of the 1980-81 school year. It remained standing and fell into disrepair for many years before it was finally demolished. And this is the site as it appears today. This is the site of the Pathways of the Patriots that the Historical Society holds in April, for those of you who have attended that. The Bernard J. Golden School was named after the former mayor and opened on Washington Street in 1958. Mr. Frederick Doherty was principal of both the Golden and the Goodyear schools. The Golden School was closed in 1978 and remained vacant for several years until it was purchased by Cummings Properties and incorporated into Cummings Park, where it is now known as 300 West Cummings Park. The Veterans Memorial School opened in January of 1960 and was named in honor of the veterans of World War I and II and the Korean War. Frederick Farry was the principal. In 1966, the first elementary school library would be established at the Veterans School. It was closed in 1978 and is today the Veterans Memorial Senior Center. The Clapp School on Hudson Street and Arlington Road opened in February 1960, with Winifred G. Sullivan of the Hanson Cummings Schools as the principal. The naming of the schools became an interesting and at times a contentious issue with executive sessions held to discuss and decide upon school dedications. While several names were considered for the Clapp School, including that of Peter Fleming, for whom Fleming Field is named, the obvious choice was George I. Clapp, the former school superintendent who had served in that position for 33 years and moved the Woburn school system so far forward. At the time of the Clapp School dedication, he was 90 years old and still living. George Clapp became superintendent in 1903, and over the next 33 years, he would move the Woburn school system into the 20th century. He was a very progressive thinker, way ahead of his time. Clapp urged the building of a new high school to alleviate the overcrowding issues. He urged the building of a new high school, and he urged the playgrounds be built around that high school for athletic teams. He wanted a playground built in the South End and in other areas of the city. He urged the landscaping and the beautification of the school grounds. He instituted the first summer school. He was far ahead on special education. He asked for, quote, an ungraded classroom for mentally deficient, abnormally backward, and foreign-speaking students, where they would receive individual instruction and a special course adapted to their individual needs, end quote. This predated mandatory special education by scores of years. He also advocated for a state tax to finance education, saying a state tax, quote, will serve in some degree to equalize educational resources throughout the state, end quote. Clapp pushed for more commercial and practical courses in business and industry, recognizing at the time that only a small percentage of students in 1914 were going on to professional careers. He supported the concept of a junior high school and asked for an examination of it. It was adopted in 1930. By 1921, the high school was again overcrowded, and he asked for an addition to the high school. He noted the reason for the crowded conditions was that in addition to more students in general, they also were staying in school for longer and not dropping out for work at age 15 or 16. In 1927, he was still pushing hard for athletic fields at the high school, and in 1928, they were finally built, including the football field. In 1932, at the urging of the mayor, the school committee imposed a 10 to 15% salary reduction on teachers, janitors, etc. Though superintendents were exempted by such cuts from the state law, Superintendent Clapp insisted on taking the 15% cut as well. Superintendent Clapp retired in 1936. His innovative and progressive tenure was wonderful for Woburn. On a personal note, his ideas, everything I read about him, his progressive thinking, his innovations, I couldn't help but be reminded of former Superintendent Dr. Louise Nolan. In 1962, the new junior high school on Middle Street was first occupied and known as the East Junior High School. William H. Flaherty was the first principal. He would later serve as the superintendent of schools in Billerica. The name of the school would be changed to the John F. Kennedy Memorial Junior High School in 1963, and it is today known as the Kennedy Middle School. The Clyde F. Reeves Elementary School opened on Lexington Street in September of 1963. It would be replaced in September of 2001 by the new Reeves School. During the 1990s, it had become apparent that once again, school buildings were getting tired and needed to be replaced. The Massachusetts School Building Assistance Program agreed to partially reimburse municipalities for new schools, provided that they met certain requirements. First of all, reimbursement was for new schools only, not renovations to existing buildings. Second, the new school had to be situated on a minimum amount of land. Third, the city and town had to agree on a site and request funds for the new school. Over several years, many cities and towns took part in the program, supported by tax dollars. Woburn, unfortunately, was not one of them. At one time, every surrounding city and town within 30 miles of Woburn was participating in the program, and Woburn was not. Our tax dollars were building schools in other communities, but not in our own. Mayor Dever was finally able to get the ball rolling. An initial study of the schools in need showed that the Goodyear and the Reeves were the most crowded and the most in need of replacement. Since the Goodyear was built about 10 years before the Reeves, it seemed like it would be the first one rebuilt. But the Goodyear, unfortunately, did not sit on a large enough lot to be eligible for the funding, and an alternate site could not be agreed upon. Finally, at the urging of Mayor Deva, the City Council agreed to go forward. The Reeves School presented the path of least resistance, and the people wanted it, and it sat on a large enough piece of land so that the building could be built right beside the old one. In September of 2001, the new Reeves School, pictured here, opened its doors. It was the first of the new schools to open since the building boom of the 1950s and 1960s. The Shamrock Memorial Elementary School opened in 1964. In the early 2000s, the roof would collapse and the school needed to be rebuilt. Of course, this school was now a priority, and the new Goodyear would have to wait. The old Shamrock would be replaced with this new Shamrock School, as it appears today. The school was named in honor of the Shamrocks, who had given their lives in World War II. The Shamrocks were a social and athletic club whose members were mostly from the south end of Woburn. Here is the Shamrock football team. Here is a page from the Woburn Daily Times with photos of the members of the Shamrocks who gave their lives in World War II and to whom the Shamrock School is dedicated. The Mary D. Altavesta Elementary School on Main Street in North Woburn opened in September of 1963. It was named for longtime North Woburn resident Mary Altavesta, who with her husband ran a small variety store. They had one of the only early telephones in North Woburn. She was a benefactor of many North Woburn Italian families, and she passed away in 1934. The St. Anthony's Club grew out of the yearly gatherings held to commemorate her death by holding an anniversary mass. Officers of the St. Anthony's Club asked the school committee to consider naming the school after her. The Altavesta School is the only school in Woburn that's named after a woman. The Daniel L. Joyce Junior High School opened in September of 1970 on Locust and Willow Streets. It was named after a longtime Woburn doctor. The first principal was Lawrence Lawley Gilgun, and today it is the Joyce Middle School. As we have seen, Woburn does not always accept change easily, and the establishment of the high school was no exception. As John McElhenney states in his book, Woburn, A Past Observed, quote, "The town was virtually dragged kicking and screaming toward establishing a high school. Many, it seemed, simply didn't see the need," end quote. But these were the days of Horace Mann, a leading advocate of public education for all in the early to mid 1800s. He was an advocate of public education. He was instrumental in the establishment of the Massachusetts State Board of Education and served as its first director from 1837 to 1849. The state began pressuring Woburn to provide a free public education for all. Woburn resisted the pressure, stating that Warren Academy accommodated all those who wanted a higher education. The problem, of course, was that Warren Academy charged tuition and was out of the reach for many of the poorer immigrants and townspeople. The state threatened to prosecute and fine the town for failing to fulfill its duty to educate its children. Under the threat of state prosecution, Woburn voted in 1852 to establish a public high school. This did not sit well with many people, and the ill feelings lingered for many years. Remember how well Woburn accepts change. 40 years later, during his commencement address to the Woburn High School graduating class, Mayor Thompson called the 1852 decision, quote, "a needless and useless outlay of expenditure," end quote, because the town already had Warren Academy. The Knight Building on Main Street held the first high school classes in 1852. This is the Knight Building. The town leased several rooms in this building located between Walnut and Everett Streets for the first high school classes. The first principal was William Stone, who left the same job at Winchester High School to take the Woburn job. Do you think that would happen today? Well, maybe, with the new building and all. After all, Mr. Finnegan left the same position in Reading to come to Woburn High. Now, many of you may be thinking that we have forgotten about one of the early schools in Woburn, the Hanson School. But actually, the building that housed the Hanson School on Main Street, opposite Hovey Street, started as the first high school. It was a wooden structure, and it was built in 1855. And this is it here. This is an 1855 photo of the first graduating class of Woburn High School. The only boy in the class was Abel Wynn. He wasn't even present for the photo. They had to add him at the bottom. This is an early diploma from Woburn High. This one was awarded to Caroline Grammer in 1870. In 1873, a brick addition was added to the front of the high school on Main Street. This building was actually used for a short time from 1882 to 1885 as a grammar school to accommodate the large population of school children. During those 3 years, the high school classes leased space at Warren Academy, and the grammar school here was known as the Hudson School. It was named after E.W. Hudson, the proprietor of the Horn Pond House. The high school classes returned to this building in September of 1885. This is a photograph of the Woburn High School football team in 1894. And this is an 1890s photo of a high school in the chemistry class. Mr. Herbert Dow is the teacher. This is the Woburn High School class of 1890 outside of the brick addition. And this is the high school battalion in 1888. It was the early form of what many of us today would call ROTC. And obviously it was rather popular, as this is the high school battalion in front of the Woburn Public Library. This is Woburn High School's baseball team from the 1890s. In 1904, Dow's farm was purchased by the city. The farm consisted of a house at 98 Montvale Avenue and almost 35 acres of land. Ground was broken for a new high school in 1905, and the new Woburn High School opened in 1907. It's pictured here. This is another depiction of the early high school. With the opening of the new high school, the former high school building on Main Street became a grammar school. And the grammar school was then named after James I. Hanson, a former principal. It was used continuously until 1960. In 1960, the Clapp School opened and the Hanson School was closed. The building was taken down in 1960 and turned into a municipal parking lot, which is located to the left of the restaurant, former Kenny's Deli, and across from 7-Eleven, former Lucia's Market. Now we thought we'd have some fun with the high school photos and give you a snapshot of the activities that occurred over the years at Woburn High School. Some of the activities exist today, and some have not existed for many years. Perhaps you remember some of the groups, or were involved with some of them during your high school years. This is the high school baseball team from 1943. The coach was Wilfred Walsh, and some of the members of the team include my father, Bob Martin, Boots Devaney is located in this photo, along with Bob Sheeran. This is the graduating class of 1945. Mr. Oral Bean is the principal. There were 2 wing additions that were added to either side of the high school building. They were started in 1929 and completed in 1930. The junior high school concept was added, and the junior high students were housed in one of the wings. This is Woburn High School's band in 1949. Perhaps. And this is the boys' badminton team in 1951. It was coached by Mr. James Brennan, for whom the new tennis courts were named. This was the girls' basketball team in 1951. The coach is Miss Higgins, and the style of the uniforms has certainly changed over the years. Here we have the football team in 1950. The coach is Paul Dorrington, and the assistant coach is Walter White. And I know that Joe Suave is located right there in the second row. It should be noted that the first home football game was played on October 5th, 1929 against Watertown. Watertown won 26-0. A parade and a dedication preceded the game, and over 5,000 people were in attendance. This is the Innitou yearbook staff in 1950. The faculty advisors were Doris Lynch, Louise Maughan, and Margaret Burke. And that's my mother, Ellen Lyons Martin, in the front row. In 1950, the Girls Bowling League was quite popular. The coaches of this were Doris Lynch and Margaret Burke, and they're located right here. Once again, my mother was part of the bowling team. We didn't know that. This is a cheerleading squad from the 1950s. And these are the drum majorettes from the 1950s. And this was the traffic squad in 1955. If you note, this is Dr. Paul Lennon over here on the right. Now, when we first saw this, we thought perhaps they directed traffic outside or something. No, they directed traffic in the hallways of the high school. And this is the National Honor Society from 1955. Only one boy in the Honor Society. Well, we know that this is Julie Johnson Murphy over here, and Mr. Shipley Ricker was the faculty advisor. After all of the photos from the high school, we would be remiss to not mention these two men, Mr. Oral Bean on the left and Mr. Henry Blake, two of the principals from Woburn High School. Between the two of them, they covered 64 years at that position. Oral Bean was born in Freeport, Maine, and graduated from Bates College, receiving advanced degrees at Harvard and from BU. He became a teacher in the Woburn school system in 1910. He was appointed principal of the high school in 1916. He served as principal of both the junior high and the high school, and he received a starting salary of $1,900. He retired in 1951 after serving the Woburn school system for 41 years. On the right, we have Henry Blake. He was born in Woburn, graduated from Woburn High in 1928, and was a graduate of Yale University. He received his master's degree from Boston College and completed courses in administration at Harvard and Boston University. He began his career teaching English at Woburn High in 1939. When a student council was first introduced, he became the first faculty advisor. World War II interrupted his teaching career, and he served as an officer in the U.S. Navy from 1942 to 1946. He returned to Woburn High and was appointed the principal in 1951. He saw Woburn High grow from a small institution with 173 students in the graduating class to a school with graduating classes exceeding 700. He oversaw the expansion of the curriculum to include advanced placement classes and exchange programs with several foreign countries. In an interview with the Woburn Daily Times in 1980, he said he, quote, thought the students are brighter and more mature than in the earlier times. and that they should be, given the excellent opportunities with which they are provided, end quote. He also spoke highly of the math team, which had done so well, the 2 Super Bowl football teams, and the state champion girls field hockey team. When asked if he regretted his upcoming retirement, he stated, quote, "One doesn't dwell on regrets and should take each day as it comes," end quote. Henry Blake retired in June of 1980. As you can see, the classes started to grow. And this is one of a series of 3 photos of the 1959 graduating class. Peter Carbone Jr. was the class president. Took 3 photographs to fit it up there, folks. The class of 1959 is holding its 50th reunion this year on October 10th at the Woburn Country Club. This is a 1966 aerial view of Woburn High School. It shows the large addition that was added on in 1964. It also shows the white school right here in the foreground. This is a photo from 1966 yearbook of students walking the hallways, and that would be in what was called the new edition. And this is the Junior Prom Grand March from 1968. And this is the 1975 Woburn High Super Bowl team. They were the champions that year. The coach for this was Peter Sullivan. Here's a photo from 1976 of the ice hockey team members Andy Santo on the left and Rob Varney on the right. And here's the 1981 championship golf team coached by Bob Duran, who's still the golf coach. In September of 2006, after years of debate and a special election for a debt exclusion override, a new Woburn Memorial High School opened its doors. The new school was built behind the old one on Montville Avenue, and when completed, the old one was taken down. It is a state-of-the-art facility, as you can see. The design incorporated some of the old with the new, as shown in the artwork that's exhibited in this auditorium and out in the main hallway. And now we come to the favorite time of year for any school student, summer vacation. This concludes our program for the evening. We hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you all for coming.
Great job. Have a nice hand for Sue Ellen Holland. Isn't it a great job? Yeah, it's one thing to be able to read and go through that this evening very professionally as she did, but it's another to put it all together and to do all the research and the writing that's necessary. So we owe a big debt of gratitude to her. Did you enjoy that, going back to school? Yeah. And Sue Ellen is absolutely correct. You know, when we started putting pictures together, we could be here all night. We could be here for 10 hours if we wanted to start show this teacher or that teacher and a whole nother program. So maybe we'll keep that in mind and do a more specified program, maybe on the high school or something, or on teachers or something like that in the years to come. If you have a good idea for a program, let us know, and we'll try to incorporate it. Thank you for coming. Keep aware of our upcoming programs. Enjoy some coffee and mingle and socialize. Thanks again.